There's the voice. Go through. Now, we being the Sessional Advocacy Committee at URFA, sent some short questions to our panelists a while ago, and each one of them has prepared a very short presentation on the questions. So we'd like to begin with Florence Stratton. Florence, do you want me to go over the questions, or are you good to go? Oh, you're muted. Florence, you need to Florence, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I think I can just address the question. I'll start off with my experience in the differences in working conditions for full-time and precarious faculty. I worked as both a sessional and a tenured member at the U of R English department. So maybe I can throw light on some of the differences. I moved back to Regina in the mid-1990s and found sessional work in the English department, as well as at both Luther and Saskatchewan Indian Federated College, now First Nations University. And after 2 years as a sessional, I was lucky enough to get a tenure track job at the U of R. It was very lucky timing on my part. Then after 9 years of good pay and benefits, I hit retirement age 1 year before mandatory retirement was abolished. And since I didn't have much of a pension, and also because I really liked teaching, I became a sessional again in the early 2000s. Now, when I returned to Regina, I was thrilled to have found work at the university. I had lived outside of Canada and away from the Canadian university system for decades. And so I was completely uncritical. And I was so enthusiastic that I decided it was my duty to attend U of R English department meetings. That's really when the disillusionment set in. Not only were sessionals banned from voting, but whatever problems the department encountered, the blame was placed on sessionals. In particular, I remember a discussion of grade inflation. Offering no evidence, the meeting decided that it was all the fault of sessionals. That was the last English department meeting I attended while I was a sessional. During my time as faculty, the sessional bashing continued in department meetings. I don't know if it still goes on today. It was certainly demoralizing. Indeed, I found the whole system demoralizing, wasteful, and unjust. One of my most vivid memories is of one of the last English department meetings I attended before becoming a sessional again. The department head at the time had asked me to make a motion that those teaching in the English department in the instructor category be given the vote at department meetings because the department head said they did so much of the work of the department. I said that I would gladly do so, but that I would only make that I would also make a motion that sessionals be given the vote. Department head said that was fine. By some miracle, both motions passed. When the result of the motion on sessionals was announced, one faculty member leapt to their feet and shouted, "You've ruined the English department," and then stomped out, slamming the door. In my experience, that's how many faculty viewed sessionals, as beneath contempt. And I also recall the difference in the way I was treated depending on my status in the department. When I was a sessional, I was invisible, largely ignored in the English department hallway, rarely greeted as a coworker or treated in a collegial manner. When I was faculty, I was generally greeted with normal courtesy and sometimes even enthusiasm. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Wow, that's a brief, rapid recap that resonates, I know, for a lot of us. Wow. Okay. I'm going to say we go through all of them, and then if anyone has questions, we can invite questions after everyone's had a chance to speak. Nick, could we ask you to go next, please?
Sure, Barbara. Would you like me to share my slides? I have a few slides. You had a few questions for me, so okay. I figured I'd answer all of them.
I should probably work out a way to add you as host.
Or co-host.
You should be able to share, Nick.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a share screen button on the bottom?
Yeah, perfect. I got it. Perfect. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so I can go fast. I do speak fast. I'm Greek, and my mother's Greek, and I had to learn to speak fast to beat her in an argument. So I'll try to go through this quickly. And if there's any questions, like you mentioned, Barbara, I'll take them at the end. And please do stop me if there's anything you have a question about regarding any of these slides. I'll just put them all up, just direct. Oops, there you go. Okay, so just very quickly, you asked me a few questions. You presented a few questions. How does Calt advocate on behalf of precarious faculty? So for those who were not here maybe earlier on, I am the chair of the Contract Academic Staff Committee at Calt. I sit on the executive, and I spent a couple of years on the committee itself. And I am, I teach at Concordia University part-time faculty and McGill part-time faculty university. So I've had an interesting little experience dealing with the life of a part-timer. So Calt, Canadian Association of University Teachers, part of the support that it provides is support, organizational support. At Concordia University, part-timers, we joined Calt a few years back. We're a standalone university, and we found that the professional support that's there, those who specialize in grievances, negotiations, public relations, and mobilization, made a difference to us, made a difference to be able to have this information and a source of professionalism that we could use whenever we wanted. I can't even tell you how many times we called or contacted the staff at Calt to ask simple questions in the middle of negotiations. We're in a negotiation, we literally step out and make a call, and we get the information so that we can go forward with our negotiations. And the membership, the people involved in Calt outside of the organization, the members like myself who are on committees and participate, have been an incredible support. Just from a general email that we have through Calt and through the membership on the Contract Academic Staff Committee, we send questions out by email, a mass email, and then people reply, give us their experience, give us the sources so we can use. The mobilization is key because the source of membership of Calt, just for our members alone, provides them with a support. A real support that they know they have a big organization behind them that can support them in whatever way need be. And the university itself, knowing that we're part of this bigger organization, sees us differently ever since we joined. Calt also provides a national voice. One of the issues Jerry pointed out very, very articulately well in the movie, but the need to have work together. You quoted Sylvain Marois, which I was with actually this morning. And I mean, it all comes down to that. Being precarious means we're alone. And I'm going to get to my next slide. We don't have the lifestyle, the career we move around. We have to move around. We don't have that bond with a bigger group that we need to have. And Calt provides the standard, the ability to grab information from everywhere, feed this information to the organizations and the membership that need it, so that we understand how we might be disadvantaged and how others are working and how others are benefiting and how we could work together to strengthen our movement and make it better for everybody, because we need to. Hope I'm going fast enough. How do precarious faculty work conditions vary across Canada? Like I was saying before, I work at both McGill and Concordia. Concordia is a more mature union. It's been around for over 30 years, and we had a president for the first 20 some odd years who was a force of nature. She brought us a lot of gains, whereas at McGill, which is a more younger union, and it's a tale of two universities. Literally, they're a few blocks apart from each other. For those of you who know Montreal, it takes 5 minutes to walk from Concordia to McGill, but the work conditions are so far apart. And I think it represents the differences that we see right across the country. And I just had some examples here. Many of you know these examples. Salary ranges right across the country could be anywhere from 5,000 to 12,000. At McGill and Concordia, McGill we were at for the longest time 6,000, whereas Concordia and University of Montreal were in the ballpark of 11,000 a course. Stipend chasms at McGill we have none, zero. Whereas Concordia, we can go up to 3,000, and we see this comparable differences right across the country. Professional development funds. In some places it's zero. McGill, it's like 45,000. 45,000 for 1,800 members. It's a joke, right? Whereas Concordia, it's 300,000. And we have an active membership of anywhere between 600 and 800 members. So we see these big chasms between two universities in the same city that are representative kind of the country as a whole. And these are issues that need to be addressed. Work conditions stats by Calt. The question was, does Calt actually keep work condition stats? They do. They do research right across the board, depending on the field of subject or the interest. About a few years ago, they did a survey and a report, research report called By the Numbers. Many of you might have seen it already, which identifies what it's like for us to be working and living as precarious workers. The idea that was mentioned in Jerry's film, how the misconception that we don't do research, that we don't publish, or that we don't want to, and that's not the case. This study found that we do want to, and if we had the means, the resources, we would do more of it. The stipend comparison, the Calt is in the process of comparing salaries and stipends depending on students and depending on course level. And we see a big variance and discrepancy between right across the country. And as the chair, the new chair, because I just recently became chair for the Contract Academic Staff Committee, one of the topics that I've become interested in, and I'm trying to work with the committee and Calt, it would be intellectual property comparisons, especially in this pandemic period where the universities we're concerned of the universities taking our material and using it. Taking our images. What are our rights to protect our content? What are our rights to protect our images? And this, I believe, is important that everybody across the country have. These are some examples of the stats that do exist, and there's many more that Calt has and can provide. The other question you had is, what more can unions do in order to support sessional instructors across the country? I can't emphasize this more than I can. Member outreach and information. Our lives are about going to work, one course here, one course there. We move around so much from one institution to another institution, maybe even taking other jobs where we don't have a permanent place to be. We're not there continuously. We're not able to get the information we need because we're so busy. So the union's responsibility should be to make sure that the members know exactly what's going on, what rights they have, what resources they have, get it out there. And in this time of era with Zoom and social media, it makes it a lot better. The amount of people who participate in our meetings at McGill and Concordia have gone up fourfold. And I don't think we should go back to the old ways where it's just in person. It should be a bimodal type of situation where you have in person and make it possible for people to join a meeting by Zoom or by any type of other teleconferencing so that you can get as many people as possible, make it as transparent as possible, and make it as democratic as possible. Comparable nego grievance management. The key here is that all unions should be focusing on job security in their negotiations and at the base root in their grievance management. Because if you can fight one case and get a little more job security or better work conditions, then you can build that up to a collective level eventually. And this is all done by making sure that each union has the information or comparable information from locally, provincially, and nationally, so that we know what others have and we know what others gain so that we can fight for those things also too. And very important, and Jerry's film pointed this out again, change the language and culture. We provide more than anybody can imagine there. Our students cannot distinguish between a full-time professor and a part-time professor. They can't. But if we take ownership of this, if we stand up and say we're professors, we deserve the same empathy and respect, and that we deserve a voice, then and job security, it will make a difference if we can sway the students, to sway the full-time faculty. Long-term, it will be significant gains. And Concordia University is a perfect example. We were able to, for the longest time, the full-time faculty and the part-time faculty didn't really have a relationship. And over the past 4 or 5 years, we've worked on this and we've developed this relationship, and this trust that's been building up over the past few years has been significant in how we deal with the employer. Because in the end, full-time and part-time need each other. And we need to be together because the employer will conquer and divide. And the last question was, does union representation and allocated resources match the proportion of sessional members? I can't speak to this scientifically or accurately because I've not done my research and I haven't read anything enough to be able to answer this in a lawyer way, because I'm a lawyer by trade. So I have a little difficulty answering questions that I don't have the information myself personally. But on a general basis, I can tell you no. The fact that we have the work conditions that we have, which are poor, means to me that we need to have more resources, more representation, because unless we have a voice at the table, and unless we have the money, we're not going to get to where we need to go. And if you look at McGill and Concordia again, at Concordia, part-time faculty have a voice in every committee, on the board, on the Senate, health and welfare. Every committee that exists at Concordia, we have a voice. At McGill, we can't even get on the board. We can't even get on the Senate. I just sent an email to the provost office, or to the board office, sorry, asking again what's going on with our request to be included in the board and the Senate. It's been 2.5 years now. It's been like 5 emails back and forth, meetings after meeting, excuses after excuses. It's sad. It's sad. And I think we need to work harder to make sure that we have a voice. And that's it. I hope that was not too fast. You can, if I went too fast, you can ask a question or just go back to the recording.
That was great. Thank you so much, Nick. It was great to have that, that national structure to the work that folks are doing. We really appreciate it. And also the view from the comparison, just like Florence's comparison between precarious and permanent experience, your contrast of the two universities is really illuminating. So, and it also speaks to the fact that these things don't have to be like they are, right? They're totally changeable, as we know from Jerry's film. So with that, since I mentioned your name, Jerry, could you speak to, do you want your questions, or are you good?
I've got them here, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, these are my questions. Was there a straw that broke the camel's back to take on this project? There wasn't one. I would say one of the most significant experiences I had, though, was when I was involved in bargaining for these. At that point, University of Lethbridge had a sessional contract, and I was teaching on their Edmonton campus. And I'd been teaching there a long time, and I occasionally wrote them emails saying, what are you doing about this sessional issue or that? So I've been advocating for a long time. And I said, you've got bargaining coming up. Make sure you have a sessional on your bargaining committee, because it was for the sessional contract. And they said, why don't you do it? So they got me involved, and I was flying down driving down from Edmonton for these bargaining sessions, and they went on for 6 months because they're very tough. But that was a very seminal experience for me. I realized I was sitting there listening to a dean and a group of people on the other side of the table make the most ridiculous arguments I've ever heard that wouldn't get a B in a philosophy 101 course, that were without evidence, that were full of stereotypes. They claimed we only taught a couple of courses. They claimed we were all wealthy. They'd actually talk out of 2 corners of their mouth. They'd say, you're all wealthy doctors or dentists just dropping in. We don't have to pay you and you don't need benefits. And then they'd say, you're temp workers. You have to accept what you get, right? So that really changed me. I did a lot of research on what was going on across the country at that point. I became the main researcher for the bargaining committee. And that opened my eyes to the fact that things were bad all around in a way that I hadn't fully realized before. So that was the main thing. And then what happened a year after negotiations, which we finally won a 15% increase, but it was a tough battle. We were about to go into arbitration when they caved on one issue, on the money issue, but not on things like increments. And that was it's still a pretty bad contract down there, I think. But we made a gain, and that sort of really got me really interested in the issue. And then I had friends tell me, well, I was making films at the time, and they said, you should make a film about it. I realized I couldn't keep teaching and make a film and go across the country and talk to people. So I just said, it's time, and I quit. What are some of the common threads among sessional instructors discovered over the course of the project? Well, most of that is in the film. Most of them were poor. An awful lot were afraid to speak out. I had people who told me they were getting their food from the food bank who refused to be interviewed or be in the film because they were ashamed. They were stressed. Most of them are committed to teaching. A lot of them are committed to research as well. A lot more are long-time sessionals than is commonly thought of. I met person after person who'd been teaching for 20 or more years. An issue was a lot of them don't have seniority. Some have seniority and some don't, and that's a big issue because it creates a small amount of job stability. Another issue was course evaluations, of course, and the usual complaints about them, that they're biased, that they're unreliable, et cetera. But they're particularly create pressure on sessionals because you don't know if you're going to get that next contract. And there are universities in Canada that say you have to maintain a certain level in your course evaluations from students, or we won't hire you back. So it's a big issue for many of them. Impactful feedback. Most of the feedback has been very positive about the film. I had one complaint that there was a lack of racial and cultural diversity, and I acknowledged that that was the case. It had to do with who was willing to take a risk, and when you've got other factors working against you, it becomes much more difficult for you when you're already being discriminated against to take a chance on losing that contract. So I had fewer people from diverse cultures than I wanted. We've got a new version of the film now, though, and we do have an interview with an African Canadian academic, and it shares a really interesting perspective. I also felt from some of my international friends and colleagues that there wasn't enough international material. So we have a new version of the film that has also an interview with a Mexican and a major US activist. Suggestions to get tenured colleagues and students engaged. Do I have suggestions? Well, I think Nick has been talking about it quite a bit, about our need to work together. We do need to work together. One of the things that permanent and continuing faculty need to understand, and I'm not sure all of them really do, is that when there's a large gap in what it costs the college or the university to pay a sessional, or a gap between that, what they have to pay a sessional and what they would have to pay a continuing or permanent person, that gap undermines the bargaining position of the continuing faculty. If I'm a dean and you come to me and you want better pay as a continuing faculty, or you want more research money, or you want more time off, or longer sabbaticals or something like that, if I look at you and say, I could hire 3 sessionals to teach all of your courses for half of what I'm paying you, so I'm not going to give you any of this stuff, forget it, right? The bargaining position of full-time people is undermined seriously, and they need to understand that we really are all in the same boat together. We can work together, and it's not a zero-sum game. I think people tend to think that if one group gets more, the other group will get less, and that is not necessarily the case, right? Budgets are flexible documents, and they respond to pressure. What else? Suggestion, to get students involved. Oh, one more thing about permanent faculty. I think there are equity committees in many universities. There was, even back in the 80s and 90s when I was teaching, there were equity committees, and they were primarily concerned with first sex and gender diversity. And then they became more and more interested in cultural and racial diversity and making sure that some equity was applied to those situations. And I think precarity is an equity issue. We are a separate class. There are haves and have-nots, and we are the have-nots as precarious faculty, and that needs to be addressed as an equity issue. Students, I think students really need to understand, as Nick was saying, that there is a difference, that some people are in one class and another group of precarious people are in a different class. We're treated very differently by the colleges and universities. I think students need to know that it does affect the quality of education, that when you're stressed and you're busy and you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, because really academic freedom does not exist for precarious faculty, in spite, even if it's in the contract, they don't have to prove anything to not renew your contract, right? Those things all affect the quality of education that the students are getting. And the CAUT survey that Nick was talking about, one of them is called Out of the Shadows. And one of the questions was, could you do a better job if you weren't so concerned about your job, if you weren't so concerned about the precarity of your position? And almost all of the sessionals said, yes, I could, frankly. And that's not to say that the quality of education being offered by sessionals is any lower than that of continuing faculty. I don't think it is overall, but the stress has to find its way, it does find its way into the classroom sometimes, right? So it's an issue for students that students need to get involved in, and we do need to involve the students, and we need to work across all the other lines too. The lines between colleges and polytechs and universities need to be erased. We're all in the same boat. We're all workers. Sessionals need to recognize that they are workers and they need to fight for labor rights. Well, particularly important is Nick is talking about getting involved, and I would just say, get onto the actual bargaining committees if you possibly can. You need sessionals. You need a voice sessionals need a voice at the table within the faculty associations very much, and on the other committees in the universities. But particularly important is a voice on the bargaining committee, because there's only so many issues you can deal with when you're bargaining, and you prioritize them. And what happens is sessional issues often find their way down near the bottom of the list, and they never get dealt with. So you need to be on that committee, and you need to insist that sessional issues like precarity, are right at the top. Thank you. I'm done.
I hope not. For now, maybe.
For now.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Though really appreciate your contributions to the discussion, and also in the context of what Nick and Florence had to shared with us. The expertise that folks have shared so far has been really useful, and I know that we have a varied audience here tonight. I recognize some permanent faculty, some sessionals, some colleagues from the Sessional Advocacy Committee, and folks from the community. There's lots of different ways that people can support labor rights across the board. Yeah, we have a resource sheet too for sessionals that I think that Ellen's is posted to the URFA site, so we can you can look there for it, or hope we might be able to have a link in the chat. But in the meantime, I would like to invite our MSO from URFA, Colin Tether, to speak. Colin, would you like the questions, or are you good to go?
Well, I'm happy. I think just to make sure that we can have some conversation, I'm going to focus on one question, if that's okay. And then if you're okay, you're happy to ask the other ones of me if you feel you need some more information. But I was really hoping to focus on just some of the most important shifts, either positive or negative in nature, that I witnessed in terms of sessional bargaining. And I think that, the reason why I'm going to focus on that one is because I think it sort of ties a lot of what's been said, together, and hopefully also will help us sort of, I hope that I can help us have a discussion around some of these items. I think that I think this this viewing being held by the Sessional Advocacy Committee, this film being created, you know, for and about sessionals, the fact that we have CAUT here, you know, the fact that we have, you know, national, international knowledge that's being created and shared is one of the most important things I think that's happening. To be completely honest with you, you know, heading down to you know, San Jose, working through CoCal, you know, being able to learn and understand the experiences that people have in Mexico, you know, all over North America, Mexico, the United States, and Canada. You know, those are really what's exciting to me, to be completely honest with you, and I think are really positive. What they do, to be honest with you, is in my opinion, they really fight against and combat the isolation of sessionals, of adjunct faculty. And I think that is, you know, at the core of, you know, what about engagement? What about finding a voice? What about getting organized? What about solidarity? And you can't have any of those things if you're, you know, if you're in your car driving to the next gig, and, you know, and unable to, you know, and then in the classroom and then in your car, you know, and so all of these things I think are really exciting and really positive. I think that we're avoiding that isolation. People, you know, I think what that leads to as well is if you're not isolated, you start to learn that other people have the same experiences as you. You start to talk to people. You start to realize that you're not, it's not a personal failing to be in a situation that you're in. You know, we talked about meritocracy, you know, in a few different ways it's come up, you know, that, you know, it is the person that got the tenure track job just that much better than me? Do I have to work that much harder? Is that, you know, maybe they just deserved it more than me. And I think that those, you know, not, you know, fighting isolation, fighting, you know, reaching out, creating that solidarity, you know, makes you realize that it's not your, you know, it's not a personal failing. This isn't necessarily a meritocracy. There's merit involved, as people have said. The people that are there, you know, they've done things that make them deserve to be there. But it's a systemic problem, and I think that also creates the connections with regularized faculty, with people who could be supporters, could be allies, you know, could be advocates, you know, and so I think that's a big part of it. It also does break down those walls. You know, again, another thing that was being touched on is just that you know, this is about a labor market. It wasn't, you know, specifically identified as such, but this, you know, it snuck up, you know, in my personal opinion, in the 80s, because you know, that's when a larger pool of postgraduates, you know, became available to take on these positions, and this is, you know, it's about somebody knowing that somebody with similar or perhaps equal qualifications is literally down the hall. You know, you said it yourself, Jerry, you know, a permanent faculty member, whether they want to admit it or not, I think knows that's a serious dampening agent on bargaining power across the board. So that, I guess that's where maybe I'm ending on a negative note. What's the negative part of this? And I think the negative part is that we, you know, if you look to Mexico, you look to the United States, there's the possibility that that's a mirror, and those folks are in some worse you know, they're working under worse conditions than people in Canada. So you know, we need that's you know, I think we can see our future, and by having that vision, we can find ways to avoid it. And I think that really it is about what is happening here tonight with us, with an advocacy committee, showing a film, helping people connect, helping people learn from other people's experiences, and not having to 12 months to having to fight tooth and nail to be able to vote on a collective agreement, whether you have a contract or not, within a 12-month period. Like URFA, I don't know how that came about, but we've had that for a long time, and I hope that wasn't a tooth and nail kind of fight. But that's something that was just learned not that long ago, and relearned, unfortunately, somewhere else. And that's, I think, really what needs. That's the challenge, is getting the experiences out there, so that people can take that, people can stand on the shoulders of what's been built, rather than having to build it up from the ground. So thanks. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Well, it's nice when you're up on your soapbox. It's like, I know you said you ended on a negative, but it felt a little bit like a positive, because it's a call to action, and I know that's what a lot of folks are supporting, and I'm hearing that from everyone. Scott, do we have some?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple questions in the chat there. Maybe Nick, could you respond perhaps to that first question there from Jeffrey?
Shall I read it? Or can you answer it? I'll read it while.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, this is from Jeffrey Clausen at USask. In their words, pardon me. We at USask are having trouble getting our employer to believe the fact that sessional faculty do work outside of the classroom, service, research, for example, during bargaining. What are some strategies for getting employers to recognize the work we do outside of teaching and move towards a pro rata model?
I'm not sure how to answer this and at the bargaining table, but it has to start before. I'm not sure if one of the key issues is professional development, and making sure that the funds do exist for members, and even as small as they might be, that these members are highlighted. One thing we do at Concordia is that for every large grant that our member gets, and then they produce either a novel, a piece of work, art, anything, or research, we find ways to highlight it in our newsletter. We put it on our website. We try to make sure that the community knows that our members, that are part-time members, are actually doing research, publishing, in every field, from theory to art. And it's important to create that base so that when you get to the bargaining table, you can point it out. And I actually had, for those of you who don't know, you don't know actually, I'm the grievance officer and the chief negotiator for the McGill Part-Time Teachers Union. And at that table one time, I had this whole scenario with somebody from the administration, and I had to point out to them that they're being very narrow-minded and very short-sighted. And I pointed out, I gave them 2 examples of part-time teachers who published and whose publications had probably surpassed maybe most of the full-time teachers there. And it was an eye-opener for him. It was an eye-opener for him. I think you need to have the examples and have the hard evidence to put it out front and to show that we're equals. We just have different skill sets. And we offer different stuff. I don't know if that answered your question.
Sure. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
Florence also put forward a question there. Could sessionals form their own association? If so, would that be an advantage? And William, I do see your hand up. And Colin, I see. Colin, did you want to respond to what Nick just said?
Yeah, sorry, I wouldn't mind just adding a little bit to that question from Jeffrey. I would just say one of the things that has been beneficial in a few different unions that I've negotiated contracts with has been to recognize that, and again, it was in the film. We've heard this for a decade. The service component is crushing a lot of the regularized faculty. You know, it's hard, and they see the, you know, the attrition of their full-time permanent colleagues. You know, they know that, you know, there's 20 of us, and, you know, there were 20 of us 5 years ago, and now there's 15, and that's, you know, whatever, 10% more work per person. So you know, or 5%, I guess in this case, sorry. But anyways, so I think one of the things that would be really helpful, and I'm sorry to take up time, is just to get those folks on board, and to negotiate payment, right? One of the things we're working on is sessionals can perform service, but they should be paid for it. You know, and yes, you do it already, but you should be getting paid for it. And that's one of the things is just, you know, one of the things that was helpful for us was getting permanent faculty on board, because they want, I think, they want people to take on some of that service work, because they're being crushed by it.
Great, thank you. Back to Florence's question there. Could sessionals form their own association? If so, would that be an advantage? Mark, you did respond to that. Would anybody else like to respond to that? Jerry, you have your hand
Yeah,
up?
I would. Joe Barry, and one of the most prominent American activists, and Helena Worthen have just written a book called Power Despite Precarity, which is primarily about strategizing how to get a fair situation for contingent faculty, precarious faculty, adjuncts, whatever you want to call us, part-timers, temps, whatever you want to call us. And it's very, very good, and it deals with this issue a lot. And Joe talks about what he calls the inside-outside strategy, which is that you work with outside groups, you work with, that sessionals need to work with full-time people, continuing faculty. But the way to do it, they have to have a strong voice within that kind of larger association. And often it works better if the sessional group is formed first, actually, so that they have some strength and solidarity of their own before they become part of a larger faculty association. But even if that doesn't happen or can't happen, even if it's part of a wall-to-wall association, sessionals need to have a voice at the table, and they probably need to have a means of talking to one another, so that and we had that at University of Lethbridge for a short period, that we had a chat that was all our own, and a lot of power grew out of that situation. Joe recommends having a kind of a caucus within the larger union for sessionals, if that's the case, because it's very easy to get for sessionals' voices to be drowned or ignored or forgotten within those larger faculty associations. And I'm not accusing anybody of doing anything. There's goodwill all around, but sometimes when push comes to shove, you've only got so much time or so many resources, and somehow sessional issues slide to the bottom of the priority list quite often. So you really need that strong voice, and sessionals need to talk with one another and become strong and stand up for their rights themselves within that. There is responsibility on all sides to make this a better situation. But if we do work together, if sessionals stand up, talk to one another, form their own groups, and if we talk to students and we talk to permanent faculty and we work together with them and realize that we are all in the same boat, then wonderful things can happen. MacEwan had a small victory, but there have been victories in other situations too. Vancouver Community Faculty Association, the Vancouver Community College, which has got the interview with Frank Costco, they began to take over their faculty association. And in California, sessional interest came to the fore because the permanent faculty were trying to recruit them. So they started doing more for sessional faculty, and they became part of that situation, but they had a strong voice going into that situation. So we can work together, and it's probably important that we do work together, but we have to have a voice within that situation.
Great. Thank you for that, Jerry. William, you've had your hand up for a while. Would you like to ask your question, please?
Well, sure. Thank you. And I'd first like to congratulate Jerry on the film. My name is Will Bushert. I'm the president of QP 3287 at the University of Saskatchewan. At the University of Saskatchewan, sessional faculty and regularized faculty are represented by two different bargaining units. So in kind of an indirect response to Florence's question from before, this is a mixed blessing in some respects, right? For predictable reasons. However, I wanted to say congratulations to Jerry on the film, and I wanted to thank URFA for an organization of which I've sometimes been a member for allowing us into the party tonight. I have a very specific narrow question though for Jerry, and Nick can feel free to comment on this as well. I'll phrase it for Jerry though. As someone who's in making the film, basically traveled across Canada looking at the situation of sessional faculty at different institutions, I'm interested in what the uptake is for just the very terminology of the idea of a pro rata compensation model. I mean, aside from VCC mentioned in the film, I guess I can link some things together. This is a very difficult sell at a university. It's not a new concept to me, but I'm interested in the overall lay of the land. At a university where sessional faculty and regular faculty are in two different bargaining units, there is an immense amount of ingenuity and sometimes disingenuousness invested into casting the roles of sessional faculty and regular faculty in a way such that they can't be directly compared. Right. So under the University of Saskatchewan Faculty Association, there's a seemingly straightforward set of criteria for tenure and promotion, a third for teaching, a third for research, a third for service, but they'll never commit to that number because that then would allow you to do arithmetic on the number, moving towards a pro rata model. So I'm not asking you to solve our problems, but aside from VCC and the other examples mentioned in the film, in Canada, what is what's the uptake on the idea of a pro rata compensation model? And especially if you could direct us to some places where it has explicitly been endorsed under that name, this might be very helpful to us. So either for Nick or for Jerry.
I'll go first. I haven't heard it talked about very much, except in my interview with David, the executive director of CIUT, right? David Robinson, who mentioned that CIUT had adopted this model. And he also mentioned what's very important is that research and service time be included in that, so that, well, when I was at University of Alberta, sessionals came into the union, and I was a sessional rep. That was back in the 90s. And the first contract that was negotiated that included sessionals, they said, oh, we're going to get you pro rata. We said, oh, wow, good, because we've been paid so much less for these courses for so long. And then they sliced and diced it. So they said, well, only 40% of the time of our permanent faculty is spent actually teaching. So we'll give you pro rata, but then we divide it by 40%. And when they did that, our pay went back down to almost what it was. We did get a boost by joining the larger faculty association, but it's not talked about very much, and the concept is misunderstood and abused frequently because a lot of sessional faculty do a lot of research. A lot of them sit on committees without being paid for them. A lot of them spend a lot of time advising students without being paid for it. So we really need to fight for that model. And I'd love to see a sample contract of some of the best practices in contracts for sessional faculty. I was advocating with Sarika Bose last year that CAUT's committee, Contract Academic Staff Committee, another name for us, Contract Academic Staff Committee that Nick is on chair of right now, could come up with a rough model contract. It didn't have to have numbers in it, but it should have things like seniority in it, increments, benefits, some of those things that everybody gets who are continuing, but very few sessionals get across the country. But I can't say that the pro rata model has been talked about very much. It should be, it needs to be, and it needs to be a true pro rata thing. It needs to acknowledge the service and the research that sessionals are doing. Otherwise, you end up not making very much more money, and you still have to go to the food bank for your food.
I'm not sure what to add to this, but it's as Jerry pointed out in the film too. It's David Robinson, the executive director, basically identified this as part of one of Calt's objectives, right? To have this pro rata. I haven't heard much of it around, other than what has been pointed out here in Jerry's film. There was not it's a slip of the mind moment when we were preparing our negotiations or demands at McGill. Our president at that union brought up some article he found somewhere showing this, and he demanded that we ask for pro rata. And I said, sure, we can ask for it, but we're at $6,000. There's no way they're going to jump up 300%, 400%, and we have to work at it. And I don't believe it's not attainable. It might not happen today, but if it's a goal that we put in place, and that this is a discussion that we have, and that the universities hear this, it's something that can be worked towards. And I see that Concordia, Jerry, you're talking about like the models. I mean, we had a president that was very ferocious, and she managed to get a lot. The stuff we have at Concordia is something that we're trying to work even harder to progress and to move around, and it's there. I had a lunch one time with the Minister of Education, the higher Minister of Education assistant, and I brought up this thing. We brought up, the McGill president, myself brought up and said, this whole pro rata thing, we should be working towards that. And his response was like, yeah, but if you reach the levels of a full-timer, then we just won't hire you. And I laughed. I said, no. I said, we are valued right across the board. Full-timers, part-timers, we can work together. We have each something to offer. We just have to make sure that we categorize the value and be able to place that value. And so I believe that argument is probably being used with full-timers sometimes in their negotiations about, like you were saying, about how that they're weakened because of our situation, our availability, and hiring cheaper contracted staff members. So it's a goal to go to. And if we can all go to that goal and focus on it and have that some of the ideal work conditions that need to be focused on, we could get there. It'll take time though, but it's nothing to not shy away from.
It's very important that we close that gap, right? And not become the cheap labor solution. We are undermining the bargaining position very hard of permanent and ongoing faculty, and we need to stop giving deans and provosts the opportunity to use us as cheap labor. That gap needs to close, and some permanent faculty will fight against that because of the prestige or the status they feel they have, or they feel they've earned, their superior pay levels and benefits, etc. But they have to recognize that we're all in the same boat, and they have to recognize that we are undermining their position, but not deliberately. And the only way to do it is to get it closer. It doesn't have to be full pro rata. Maybe we don't need to ever get to that full, but I would say we need about 90% at least. And right now we're about 50% at best.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for your answers.
Colin, did you want to also comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry to chime in again, but William, URFA achieved a type of pro rata in the 2017-2021 collective agreement. It's not perfect. We had to make some sacrifices. We got a foot in the door. We absolutely needed the faculty to take a strike vote and really fight hard for sessionals to achieve it. It was it really in a lot of ways it was a huge part of the strike mandate and why we took the strike mandate. At the U of R, we didn't achieve sessional service, but we did achieve it at two other affiliated campuses. So in addition to doing the math, which is sort of 0.7 of the person's floor. Let's just, so anyways, I don't need to get into details. Give me a call or somebody at URFA. But we did achieve 0.7 of a person's floor per course kind of thing. Sorry, what we did was we took away service of an instructor and then we divided it by their normal teaching load. So it's 0.7 of their total wage divided by 6. But anyways, those details aside, we also then negotiated at 2 of the affiliated colleges an hourly rate for serving on committees. So we're kind of cobbling this thing together. But it's and not everybody sessionals, not every sessional likes it. So that's part of our this round of bargaining is trying to get that trying to come together again as a union to see if we're recommitting to this pro rata model that we test drove for about 2 years here now. So thanks.
I just want to mention too that in the big Ontario college strike that is in the film, you saw the same work, same pay signs. So that basic concept is certainly out there and being talked about and being fought for. They didn't get it, but they were fighting for it.
Great. Thank you, Colin and Jerry. Nick, you wanted to comment as well on that?
Yeah, I just want to add to what this discussion, and we need to demonstrate the amount of work we are putting in. And like Jerry was talking about before, the amount of student time we spend. Sessionals or part-time faculty usually get the larger, more introductory courses quite often, which are, last semester I had five courses of 118 students apiece. And being online, I'm sure all of you experienced it. When you're in class and one student asks a question, it answers 30, 40 other students who might have a similar question. It's not the same thing anymore. They can send you an email. They can ask a question. They can online. They don't listen, so you have to answer many emails. We spend a lot of time with the students. We spend a lot of time with the faculty, like Jerry was saying. We're part of committees, and many of our members in Calt or contract academic staff are on committees and work for free or for peanuts. And I think we need to create a tangible base of information, like through surveys, through studies, to show the administrations how much work we're actually putting in. So when they say to us, what do you do? We say, well, this is what we do.
Great, thank you.
Can I make a comment on that?
Of course.
There's kind of an obverse to what Nick is just saying. And of course, the strategy that both Nick and Jerry are recommending is a strategy that we have been pursuing to some effect for the last 3 or 4 rounds of collective bargaining. The obverse of what Nick says, though, is a strategy which seems to actually produce a kind of odd silence sometimes on the employer side in collective bargaining, which is to point out that the University of Saskatchewan takes pride in its status as a U15 institution, right? Let's think of itself as an elite institution. And if you point out, sessional faculty are the first face that many students will see, the first experience that they will have at the university. And if they're crammed 6 to a room with crappy furniture in an inaccessible building, you should have some concern for us, if not out of justice, if not out of fairness, for the sake of the reputational effects that your condition of sessional faculty has on your institution. The justice and fairness arguments have not worked fully ever, and I've been in several rounds of collective bargaining now. The reputational effects argument actually seems to cut some ice here sometimes. It's resulted in a few small but important changes in our working conditions.
Very good points. Thank you, William. There is one question that's been lingering in the chat there. I've had my eye on from Ruth Silvertaub. Ruth, is this question directed to Nick? The question is, have you had any success unionizing sessionals at law schools? Were you wondering if Nick could answer that question?
Yeah, I don't know if the administration is insisting that we include the law school in the bargaining unit, and we don't want to because they're very anti-union. It isn't every university that has a law school. We happen to have one. And I just wondered if any of the law schools are organized and if there's any challenges.
The question is to me, Ruth. I personally have not worked towards unionizing any law schools. At McGill, we have a law school, and it's part of the faculty, part-time course lecture association. And yes, you're right. It's quite interesting dealing with them, to say the least. I had a couple of meetings last week with the associate dean, and the arguments quite colorful. So I understand the complications that entails in dealing with law schools sometimes. But I haven't myself any experience to be able to answer that. I'm not sure if anybody else has seen this experience somewhere or can provide the information, but not myself.
The law school is part of the faculty association at the University of Alberta, and it has been for since the beginning. But the odd thing is about sessionals who are lawyers dropping in to teach in law school. We're given the ability to sort of scoot around the regular contract, and the law school was allowed to pay them less at University of Alberta. And they thought the union representative that was talking to me thought that was a good idea, but I thought that was a very bad idea. You shouldn't let people make end runs around your contract in any way, no matter who you think they are, whether you think they're rich or poor or whatever. The contract is a contract, and a course is a course.
Right. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Just our one last question. Colin directed one to the William there in the chat. UFS has a law school. Are there any challenges there?
I was just typing out my answer. I can say it more quickly.
Sure, please do.
It's a mixed bag, and partly it touches on what Jerry was just saying. There are quite a few sessional faculty in the law college at the University of Saskatchewan. The majority, not the vast majority, but the majority are lawyers doing professional development or professional service, and they do not care about our union at all, and are not active in our union and do not participate, kind of predictably. However, several members of our executive in the Sessionals Union are drawn from the law faculty, and they're some of the more effective advocates that we have. So, no fair painting law school faculty with the anti-union brush unilaterally. Some of them are principled unionists who want to do the right thing for the right reasons. Others are just there for getting their ticket punched, and they don't really care about these issues at all.
Yeah, I used to work for a union, and I'm a sessional at the law school, and there's about 3 of us that I teach a workers' rights class. But most aren't, and they're working against the union.
Okay, thank you. And Nick, one last comment on that, and then we will have to wrap things up, people. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. To add to what William is saying, and Ruth, to your question, or the question about the law school, go find lawyers. Part-time faculty do come in and teach law courses here and there in different, like in management departments. You'll get lawyers who come in, they'll teach like business law, introductory business laws, or in continuing education departments, though you'll get them there too. Go find them and recruit them, because they're good, right? We at Concordia, we're very lucky. There's 2 of us who are active members, active on the bar, the Quebec bar. We're both active lawyers, and 1 member, the president, who is a lawyer in training by training. And it makes a difference when you're negotiating with the employer, that they know you're there, and the rights of the members are protected even more. And there, I think what William is saying, a lot of them in the law schools will come in and go because they just come and teach one course and they go do their thing, and they might not have the time or the concern for it, but you can find lawyers who will be interested. And if you find them, it's a good asset to have.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. We do have one more hand up.
Chantal has a hand up.
Yes, we do have one more hand up. Chantal, go ahead. And this will be our last comment, everybody. I swear.
You're on mute.
You're muted, Chantal.
I'm unmuted. Okay, go ahead, Chantal.
You're still muted. Okay.
So I know Jerry and also some of the people associated with URFA who put on this amazing event. I work for CAUT, and I just wanted to say hello and goodbye at the end. But just to say, I think this has been an amazing discussion and a really important discussion about how to build solidarity between those who are already in the system and who are, well, they're all in the system, but who are already recognized as being officially in the system and those who are not. I think this was an amazing discussion. It's not an easy one, and it's going to be increasingly difficult. Casualization is really, really hard in bargaining. But I just wanted to say that I think that the way that you are trying to address the issue of solidarity, that there is no way forward for the academic profession without recognizing how it's being undermined by casualization precarity, is the key thing. And you're trying to do that. It's not perfect. It's never perfect. It's not perfect across the country. But CAUT really, really appreciates that you're doing this in Fair Employment Week. This is across the country a big deal. The public is paying attention. So thank you for doing this. And that's what I wanted to say.
I want to say thank you, Chantal, who was a great help when I was in collective bargaining, and was my teacher, and a huge help in making the film. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think those are great comments to end this discussion on. So thank you, everybody, for attending and your participation, your thoughtful comments, and to Jerry, of course, for embarking on making this film, and to all the other panelists who contributed so wonderfully to this discussion. We appreciate your time very much. And on behalf of SAC, thank you very much.
And just say thank you also, Scott, to all of you for having me, inviting me here. This was an amazing experience. Jerry, fantastic film, fantastic film. I'm gonna be sending it out, telling people about it so they can watch it also. And everybody here, the questions were very eye-opening.
Great, thank you. And of course, also a huge thank you to URFA and all the work that they do in supporting sessionals at the University of Regina and associated colleges.
Thank you all. I just want to say thank you for honoring me in this way, or the film. Really, it's the participants in the film that made it, not me. And I want to thank you for doing this. And it was a great conversation. And wow, hats off to URFA and SAC and Barbara and Scott and everybody involved in this. And it was great to see you joining us, William and Chantal, and Jeffrey, I think, is here somewhere too. And Nick, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.